Hello, I'm Fred Barnard, and I'm here today with Talking History with Jim Halsey. Jim is the retired fire chief of Troy, serving in that capacity from 1975 to 1994. And Jim comes from a family that has a long history in Troy. Many families in Troy have ties to the Halsey family. Jim, thank you for taking time out of your golf schedule to be here today.
Well, you're quite welcome.
One of the first thing I'd like to do is talk a little bit about your family history in Troy. When did the Halseys come to Troy, and where did they settle, and who were they?
Well, they came to Troy Township in the 1830s.
Wow.
And the first Halsey came over and married the daughter of George P. Morris, who owned a farm on Livernois, or Main Street in those days, between 15 Mile and 16 Mile, which is now Maple Road and Big Beaver Road. So I think it was Eliza Halsey came and married Cornelia Morris, and
That started the Halseys.
the rest is history, right?
So where did they come from? New York or something, or did they have land grants or something?
Well, originally they came from New York.
New York.
When they came to the United States in the 1600s, they settled
Wow.
in. They landed in Quincy, what is now Quincy, Massachusetts, and then they went to Long Island, Southampton, New York, and they settled there for a while. And then they started the migration west, and there are a few towns along the way as they made their travels west with the name Halsey, but they settled in Warren, the village of Warren, which when they first came to Michigan, and then one of the sons came to Troy Township to meet up with the Morris girl.
Well, that's interesting. Back, the first Halsey that I remember was John Lee Halsey, and he was the first fire chief in Troy and stuff. Tell me a little bit about from John Lee forward, where the Halseys, your family history kind of.
John Lee was my grandfather,
Okay.
and everybody called him Lee. And then, of course, my dad was William Halsey, or Bill Halsey, and he was a charter member of the fire department in 1940, along with my grandfather. And, of course, I joined, I followed in my dad's footsteps, as did both of my brothers, Dick and Bill. And now my son, John, is involved in the fire service. He started in Troy, and he's now in Southfield, so it's a long history.
It just keeps going. And I know a lot of firefighters in Troy are related somehow to the Halsey family, too.
There have been many in Troy, right, and all over.
Describe your childhood in Troy. What was Troy like when you were growing up and Troy High School was just started, basically?
It was gravel roads for part of the year, mud roads the rest of the year. There were a few paved roads, but a lot of the major roads were gravel back in the 40s. And I always referred to, there were more cornfields and haystacks in Troy, and there were houses. So
you grew up in Big Beaver Corners, what was known then as Big Beaver
yeah,
Corners?
the village of Big Beaver, right.
The village of Big Beaver. Where is Shar from, and where did you meet?
She is from Manistee,
Mm-hmm.
and she was a teacher in Troy at Morris School. She didn't realize at the time that she'd wind up marrying the great-grandson of George P. Morris, but she was at the George Morris Elementary School.
Oh my gosh.
And got fixed up on a blind date.
Oh my.
So
This is when you were fire marshal.
Yeah, this was in 1966.
So how did you become involved in the fire service? When you started as a volunteer, how did that happen?
Well, I think you just kind of evolve into it. My earliest childhood recollections are the fire station. My grandfather was a firefighter. My dad was a firefighter. I started going to the fire station when I was just, 2 years old or younger, and continued to go. And when we were teenagers, another son of a firefighter in Big Beaver, John Truesdell, and I started the Troy Township Junior Volunteer Fire Department, and several kids in Big Beaver belonged to that, and some of them went on to be firefighters in Troy. And when I was old enough to join, I put my application in, but I'd been going to fires for years before that.
Tell me what the junior fire department did.
Well, we
I know.
used to run around on our bicycles, chase the fire trucks, those who were close enough to, the fires who were close enough to go to, and we'd help them roll the hose up afterwards. If it was a grass fire, back in those days, you could take part in the activity and
Yeah.
get a broom and
In those days, they'd get anybody they could to fight a grass
That's
fire.
right.
I remember.
the more the kids would do, the less they had to.
So when you became a firefighter, you were a volunteer to start.
Correct. I started in December of 1960 as a volunteer.
And then when did you become a paid firefighter?
I became fire marshal, which was a paid position, in February of 1966.
Okay. And then you were in fire marshal until 74 when? Mike
75,
Ford,
right.
75 when Mike Ford retired.
Right. Mike retired and I was appointed fire chief and served there until January of 1994.
Wow. Describe what the Troy Fire Department was like when you first started. There was only probably Station 1 and 2, or maybe 3 was starting by then, I think.
When I started in 1960, yes,
Yeah.
officially started, there were 3 stations.
Yeah.
Station 1 was on Rochester Road, right about where I-75 is today. Of course, Station 2 was on Livernois, just south of Square Lake, kind of across the street from your family home.
Right.
And Station 3 was where the Somerset Inn is today. And that started in 1958.
During your tenure as fire chief, you saw Troy change from a rural farm community to a semi-suburban community. How did that feel, making all those changes and making all the changes that you had to make the fire department run to meet the needs as a growing town? That had to be pretty demanding, all those buildings going up pretty fast.
There was a lot of change. When I retired, in my comments I said I watched Troy go from haystacks to high-rises.
Right.
And was very fortunate, had a lot of very dedicated firefighters that were willing to put forth the time and the energy for training, so we could meet the demands of a growing community. And I think the Troy Fire Department's done very, very well to meet those demands.
While you were chief, Station 4, 5, and 6 were built.
No, they were 4 and 5 were
Built while you were chief?
built under Mike Ford's regime.
Were they built 4 and 5?
Yeah, Station 4 started in 1969, and
Uh-huh.
Station 5 started around 1971.
How did you come up with where those fire stations are located? What did you do to say, we need one here, one here, one here? What was the, how did
Well,
you
in
plan
the in the early 60s, there was a master plan developed for the community that had originally located 11 fire station sites around the city. And that was on some old standards that only allowed like a mile or a mile and a half response distance. That got pared back to 6 sites, and then while I was chief, we cut it back to 5 sites, or 6 sites. It was 7 sites,
Yeah,
and
it
we
was
cut it back to 6.
Uh-huh.
But you'd use that original plan to locate buildings. Because it's a volunteer concept, you also had to kind of look at where the clusters of housing was located, so you could attract volunteers and have them have quick response. As you may recall, there was original plan was to relocate Station 2 down to Long Lake and Livernois, and all of the Corps firefighters were at Square Lake and Livernois, so we split the difference and put it halfway in between Long Lake and Square Lake. Right. Well, one, if you want
makes
to
sense,
continue
yeah.
the concept, you have to be able to have them respond.
Yeah. The fire stations, when they were first built, at least some of them, were cement block buildings, flat roof, square, and kind of like a little garage type thing. Now, if you look at a fire station, most of them look like a residence house. How did that come about?
Well, we were building stations in residential areas, and you didn't want them to look like a warehouse. And Frank Gerstenecker was city manager at the time, and when we decided to relocate Fire Station 1 up to the corner of Big Beaver and Rochester, we said, well, let's do a Georgian style or a colonial style building. And we hired a local architect that had done several of that style office building along Big Beaver and in Troy, and he developed the first plan, and we liked it, and then when we rebuilt Station 4, we used that concept. And of course, then it went to 2 and 5.
Right.
So, and then to 6, but Station 3, because of its location, when that was rebuilt, that style didn't really blend itself with Big Beaver Road, West Big Beaver, so they went to a more office building look. So.
Great. A lot of the people look at fire trucks and see them as red trucks. And you see a red fire truck going down the road. Troy has mostly or all yellow trucks. Why is that?
Well, it started in 1971 with a ladder truck. Mike Ford, who was chief at the time, had gone to an international fire chiefs conference. And there was a lot of discussion about visibility of fire apparatus, and some of you may recall there was almost a bright green or a chartreuse color that they were painting fire trucks, but Mike had seen a, quote, chrome yellow fire truck on the display floor. He liked the looks of that, so we called the manufacturer and told him to change the color from red to yellow, and we've been that way ever since. And there were a few communities around that copied our yellow color, Sterling Heights and Flint and Birmingham, and I think as of today, just Troy and Birmingham are still using it.
Yeah. Red is a more traditional look for a fire truck. They think of a fire truck as a red fire truck rather than a yellow fire
right.
truck. Yeah.
But
being fire chief, you had a lot of exposure to fire stations, fires, and incidents throughout the city. Are there any major incidents or fires that stick out in your mind that you say, oh God, that was a really big one, this was a really horrendous fire? Or,
well, obviously there are several that remain in your mind. The fire at Michigan Timber and Truss in the mid-60s, that was about an 18-hour operation with their storage yard caught on fire. So just imagine 3 or 4 million 2x4s burning.
Yeah.
That was a lot of work. We've had several major industrial fires in the plastic plants that used to be around town, but probably the ones that remain most vivid in your mind are those where lives were lost.
Right. Back in the 70s, I don't know what your involvement was, Troy started a formal training plan, which you and I I was in the first class. How did that come about? Why did they get to the stages of the formal training plan where when I first joined it was kind of informal training?
Well, the state of Michigan developed some training standards and started what was then called the Michigan Firefighters Training Council. And they started a 66-hour program for basic training. And Troy was one of the first pilot programs that ran that in 1971, I believe. It was for Station 5 when they started. We ran the class and had state instructors, and all of the firefighters were state certified then. And it's just evolved from there. It grew. I was one of the first certified instructors in the state. And now all firefighters in Troy are, receive in advance or in excess of 400 hours of classroom training before they're even allowed to go off probation. So.
Yeah. I know when I first did my training, it was at the Birmingham Fire Training Tower, and then Troy built their training tower.
Yeah, that was dedicated in 1975 in honor of Mike Ford.
Right. And now they got an even nicer training
Yeah,
tower.
very nice.
Facility, yes, right. One of the events that maybe not a lot of people know about is the firefighters' memorial service when a firefighter dies. And can you tell us how that ceremony started? Is it used throughout the fire service? Is it something that we've kind of added to and developed in Troy? I know you've made a few changes to it.
There are, I think, several departments that use memorial services. Usually it's for line of duty deaths. They'll have some kind of a service for the firefighter, but in Troy it started in the 60s as far as I know, and it's always been there in my history, and it's for any firefighter who has served, and for whatever the cause of death. If the family desires a memorial service, we provide one.
So you added in the firefighter's prayer, the bell, some of the things that are in there.
Right. Yeah.
It becomes a very emotional service, you know, it's like the day before a funeral takes place for that firefighter.
Well, it's a day or two before, depending on the visitation schedule at the funeral home.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah.
There are a lot of new young firefighters in Troy. What happens in Troy that makes those people come out and still have a volunteer fire department? I know there's a paid staff here in City Hall, but there's also 160 volunteers, and they keep that number pretty good. How does that keep working in Troy?
Well, through, I think, a lot of effort on the part of the fire chief's office and different other community activities. I think every young boy, anyway, has a desire to be a fireman or a policeman when he's growing up. And now, young ladies have those same desires. And the Troy Fire Department allows them to fulfill some of those dreams and wishes. Some of them use it as a career step onto a full paid firefighter's job. Some of them, do it to give back to the community. Some of it, do it for the excitement. And there's some inherent excitement built into the job.
What do you think is that unique character in the Troy Fire Department that keeps it volunteer from 1940 to today? It's always been there. People just seem to come in and serve. I mean, your family served many generations, and that's true throughout all the fire stations, I think.
Right.
But there's also other people that come in. It's like a living culture almost, separate from the fire department too.
Yeah, it is. It's the culture of the Troy Fire Department and the culture of the city of Troy. Volunteerism in the city of Troy is very large in everything we do here in government in Troy, through all the commissions they have that are volunteer positions, Parks and Recreation, everything is pretty much run by volunteers or staffed by volunteers, and it is family oriented. I think, there's been a lot of family involved in the Troy Fire Department, and then they talk to their neighbors or acquaintances and get them involved and have them down at the fire station. They see what fun it can be and the rewards that come with it.
One person talked to me, had said Troy is like having 6 fire departments in one town because the stations all run independently. They have their own volunteer assistant chief and captain and lieutenants, and they Station 1 is a little different in character than Station 2 is a little different, and they all have a personality. Do you see that personality and how that interrelates?
Well, not nearly as much as it used to be. Back in the 50s and 60s, truly it was separate fire departments. Mm-hmm. And part of the things I think that brought it together as one was the mandatory training that we instituted. All the firefighters had to do the same things in training. All the apparatus, the fire trucks, became very similar, so there wasn't my truck's better than your truck concept.
Originally it was.
That's true, right. There was a lot of that.
Why did Station 1 have the better truck? Yeah.
Well, because I was chief. But there was, a lot of that stuff went on. So.
Right.
But
is there any particular incidents that you can think of that you don't want to talk about or would talk about? Or?
Well, from the time I became involved in 1960, we were pretty much on the same page. Right. But I recall discussions from my dad and from Mike Ford that there was always, it was a friendly rivalry between Station 1 and Station 2, and because Station 2 was the new kids on the block.
The newcomers, What do they know about fire?
That's right. And the old timers were out to prove them that they didn't know what they were doing. But
one of the things that came up too was the Livernois Debating Society. Can you tell me what was the Livernois Debating Society?
Well, I don't know. It must have been something that took place at Station 2.
Probably about 4:30 or 5 o'clock each day.
Yes, there was a group that used to get together at Station 2 after work. Would be a stop on the way home and maybe a game of euchre or two to take the edge off of a hectic day. And there were lots of problems solved at that
Over a
meeting,
euchre
at
table.
those meetings, right?
Friendly discussion.
That's
Not
right.
loud, though, but friendly.
Well, some are not so friendly, but we're all friends at the end of the day. So.
Absolutely. What do you see as your greatest personal reward or achievements as being fire chief for the city of Troy?
Well, there were lots. Probably the greatest thing that I took out of my time as a chief was that the volunteer fire service in a city the size of Troy continues. It's a great thing to know that I was part of a very successful volunteer fire service, and it continues to thrive, and people from not just in Michigan but all over the United States are somewhat mystified by the Troy, Michigan Fire Department. And
one thing I forgot to mention in my questions was, tell me a little bit about your role as International Fire Chief, or President of the International Fire Chiefs Association. You took on that job and had some duties traveling around the world.
Yes, of course I was involved in almost every Chiefs Association that there was. Starting at Oakland County, I served as a chair of that group. The Southeastern Michigan Fire Chiefs, the Michigan State Fire Chiefs, the International Fire Chiefs, both in the Great Lakes Division, which is the 7 states around the Great Lakes, and then yes, I was fortunate enough to be elected to the board of directors for the International Fire Chiefs, and then president in years 91 and 92, 1991, 92. And they have about 16,000 members at that time in 29 different countries around the world. So
they didn't have any problem with a chief of a volunteer fire department being chief of that association?
Well, there may have been some, but there were more that didn't, that voted. But
okay.
no, there have been chiefs of volunteer departments that have served as president in the past. And there's been, before my time, there's been one or two since my presidency.
That's interesting. Last question. In even the fire service or your personal life, what do you want to be remembered for?
I guess there'd be probably one for personal life and one for professional life. And
can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, in the professional life, I guess I would like to be remembered as one who helped Troy continue a great tradition, and somehow left a few footprints around that still exist. Personal life, I want to be someday remembered as a great dad and a great grandpa, and hopefully a great great grandpa, and however many more go on. But leading a good life, I think, is the key to happiness.